This episode is brought to you by Cora tampons. Made from 100% certified organic cotton, every Cora product is made with pure and ethically sourced ingredients. No pesticides, no fragrances, no bleach, no BPA, no synthetic materials. If you're still using conventional tampons, we need to talk. You don't even know what you're putting inside of your vagina. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora today, and you'll receive your first month supply free of charge. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 139. Welcome to the 139th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. As you can tell, I'm squeaking today. I've lost my voice, and so I'm a little bit hoarse. Fortunately, the episode that I'm sharing with you today was recorded well before I lost my voice, so you don't have to listen to me squeaking the whole time. I'm really excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, you're getting a really unique window into infertility and what it really looks like. Today's guest, Stephanie, was trying to conceive for 9 years before she conceived. And so today she not only shares about her journey and what it was like, but also how she was able to maintain hope and positivity throughout that journey. We talk about a lot of the real topics that come up during that period of time, like how infertility can impact your sex life and how it can really play on your confidence and really trying to figure out who you are. If you've always thought of yourself as a mother, then during those years of trying and not being able to conceive, it really forces you to look deeper inside yourself and really figuring out who you are as you kind of go on that journey. So I'm really happy to share this conversation with you. And of course, I want to thank Stephanie for being here and sharing her journey so candidly. One of the topics that comes up so much with my clients is how charting can really play an integral role in this process of trying. And from my perspective, when women come to me, there are always things that show up in their charts that are quite apparent to me because, of course, I have years of chart reviewing experience. And so it's often quite apparent to me when things are off quite quickly. And although, I've said it on the podcast a number of times, like you can't necessarily just look at someone's chart and say, okay, this is the problem. It really gives some significant clues as to where we're going. So it causes us to ask, in many cases, the right questions that lead us to the answers that you really need. My experience has been working with clients and also personally, and just throughout this process of charting, is that when you're working with someone who has that knowledge of how to interpret your charts, it's going to get you to the answers quicker. I've said it on the podcast as well a number of times that all of my clients are working with a number of health professionals, so they have a number of people on their team, but I can't really think of a client who I've worked with who we haven't identified something, whether it was some sort of underlying condition or potentially something that was happening hormonally, and that is because of what shows up in your chart. And it's because when you know what's normal and what's not, and what could potentially be causing those things, it leads us to ask those questions. And so really and truly, it's getting to those answers a lot faster. I help my clients to expedite this process. I mean, you can't force your body to heal quicker, but if you don't know what the issue is to begin with, then that delays you starting that process of healing. So ultimately, it does speed it up. So if you've been charting yourself and you've been having questions or challenges, or your cycles are just, you're not really sure what's happening, you don't think that they're healthy, they should look a certain way, or you feel that they should look a certain way and they're not, and you're just wanting some extra support, I would encourage you to head over to fertilityfriday.com/work-with-me. And from there, you can actually book a free 15-minute consultation with me if you have questions about the programs that I'm offering, just to see if it would be a good fit and how I could support you in that. And before we jump into today's show, I just want to take a moment and thank our sponsor, Cora tampons. All right, ladies, today I want to talk about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, a topic of access to menstrual products. If you're anything like me, and you know that I live in Canada, and I know that I have listeners worldwide, and I also know that the majority of you listening have never had an issue where you literally don't have access to menstrual products. Like, you get your period and you can't go to work because you can't afford to buy yourself a pad or a tampon. That is not something that I've ever had to face, and I know that the majority of you listening have never had to face that either. If you're missing work or school, it's because potentially your period was painful or something else was going on, not because you couldn't access menstrual products. And so it bothers me just on a really deep level to know that there are girls and women out there who have such limited access to these resources based on where they live, that when they get their periods, they literally cannot afford menstrual products, and that prevents them from attending school. One of the things that I love about Cora is that they've taken a stand on this issue and incorporated supporting these women in low resource settings as part of their business model. Whenever you buy tampons from Cora, every month's supply that you purchase, Cora will actually buy a month's supply of pads for girls in India. And they're working to set up a similar relationship for girls in Kenya. And so what I really love about that is that, in addition to getting some amazing products that are made with great intention, so 100% organic, no synthetic materials, no pesticides, none of that yucky stuff inside your vagina, you're also simultaneously taking a stand and supporting girls in low resource settings. And through your purchase of Cora tampons, you're actually allowing some of these girls to go to school where otherwise they wouldn't be able to. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while, you'll know from my perspective, I believe that menstrual products should just be accessible in 100% of the places. If you go to a restaurant and you go to the bathroom, just like you don't have to bring your own toilet paper when you're going to the bathroom, I believe that menstrual products should actually just be free and just be available everywhere. And so this is a great way to at least provide access to girls in low resource settings. And I love that Cora brings awareness to these important topics just by doing the work that they do. So make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/Cora to start your free trial today, so you'll get your first month's supply free of charge. And then every month's supply of tampons that you buy, you're supporting a girl in a low resource setting. So a girl in India will receive a month's supply of pads for every month's supply of tampons that you buy. So again, that's fertilityfriday.com/Cora. Now let's head into today's episode. And today I'm excited to welcome my guest, Stephanie Rice-Singer, to the show. Stephanie is a fertility coach and a licensed marriage and family therapist, and she's been a therapist for 9 years. And she also has a podcast, so she's a fellow podcaster. She started the Holistic Fertility and Wellness podcast after experiencing several years of fertility challenges and also pursuing holistic approaches to improving her fertility. And what she found was that the information that she was looking for was not as accessible and readily available as she had hoped for. And so we'll hear more from her about how that inspired her to create her podcast. But in today's show, we're actually going to be talking a lot about Stephanie's own journey to fertility. So Stephanie was trying to conceive for about 9 years, and she's pregnant now. So congratulations, Stephanie.
Thank you.
And so I'm really excited to delve into that. And so welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be on the show because I am a huge fan of your show and I recommend it to people all the time. So it's a pleasure and an honor to be able to do this.
Well, thank you so much for being here. And I was on your podcast.
You were.
Several months ago. So for the listeners, if you want to hear me be interviewed by Stephanie, it was a really fun interview. It was really great. And so I'll make sure to link our interview in my show notes page there.
Perfect.
Yeah. But even before we started the podcast today, I was telling you, I'm just so excited for you that you're pregnant. And you said that you're 28 weeks along. So you're well into the second trimester. Or are you in the third now?
I just started the third trimester, and it's so funny because it's like everybody says like the third trimester you get you start to get tired again, and there's all these other symptoms that come up, and I swear like as soon as I hit 28 weeks all of that started happening.
Yeah, it's really strange and interesting. I mean, not every woman experiences that. I know for me, I experienced quite a shift in the second trimester. I've been through it twice, so as soon as I hit the second trimester, because I'm usually just like so tired in the first trimester, almost to the point that you can't even understand it. Like it's just so exhausted just the whole time. And then as soon as the second trimester hits, then I usually feel great. But I know that every woman doesn't experience that, even in terms of the morning sickness, where some women, it goes away, and other women, they're still puking at 5 months, and they're just like, well, what is this about?
Yeah. Yes. That was me. Yeah.
Oh, no. Yeah. Well, I mean, just to kind of back up a little bit, I mean, 9 years is a really long time.
Yeah.
And so maybe let's start by, you could just share a little bit about your fertility journey. And obviously it seems a little bit ridiculous to take us through 9 years in a couple minutes, but
sure.
I guess the overview, and then we'll dive in deeper from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it all started when my husband and I had been married for just a couple of years, almost, I guess, like 2.5 years. And I had been taking hormonal birth control before that time. And I started to realize that some of the symptoms that I had been experiencing were related to the birth control, and really didn't like that once I started learning about all of that. And so I told my husband I wanted to go off of it, and so that we would just kind of be open to having a baby. And so we agreed on that, and I stopped taking birth control pills, and we were just open at that point, like not trying, but not preventing it. So we did that for a couple of years. And within those couple of years, I know for a lot of people, like 2 years feels like an eternity, and it felt like sort of a long time for us. I started to experience some of that disappointment and confusion about like why this isn't happening, but at the same time thought that it wasn't, we weren't officially trying. So I didn't have major concerns at that point. But then I found at a garage sale, Taking Charge of Your Fertility by Tony Weschler. And that just totally opened my eyes to so many things. And we started using the fertility awareness method. I started charting and learned a ton about my body and what was going on. And I was actually very encouraged because most of what was going on for me seemed fairly normal at that point. And then 4 years into our journey, and while I was charting, we got pregnant. And that turned out to be an ectopic tubal pregnancy. So for those who are not aware of what that means, it means that I had the fertilized egg had implanted in my fallopian tube, which is not a good place for an egg to be. It needs to be in the uterus. So that can actually be life-threatening. And so that whole situation, beyond the devastation of losing a baby, it was also very traumatic physically. I luckily didn't have to have surgery, but I did have a methotrexate injection, which is like a small dose of chemotherapy. And that was no fun. And that was a really difficult situation for us and a really difficult thing to go through. However, at the same time, we were encouraged because we had gotten pregnant, and we had gotten pregnant naturally. And so we kind of assumed like, okay, well, we'll just easily get pregnant again. And actually kind of an interesting piece is that I had been told by my OB that there was a 75% chance that I would have another ectopic. And I was like, well, that's crazy. Like even at the time, I thought that seems insane. I'm going to go ahead and not believe that. And so we just went along as usual. And after things weren't happening for a few months, we decided that we wanted to adopt. And not as a replacement for a biological child, but as something that we really truly believed in and thought that this would be a great way to add to our family in the meantime, that like at some point we will have a biological child and let's also adopt. So we went through that whole process, and we were adopting from the foster care system. And so that's already kind of a really emotional thing to do. And long story short, that ended up being a 2-year journey that resulted in nothing. We had never had one placement. We never had a baby in our house. So that was another just huge, huge loss for us. And then we moved from California to Kansas not long after deciding to drop the adoption process. And that's when I started the podcast, which we can get into a bit how that all happened. And I started seeing an acupuncturist, and she has been just a huge, incredible help through all of this. So making some real serious changes in my diet, using some supplements and herbs and essential oils, and seeing this acupuncturist for a year and a half. And then I finally became pregnant naturally last August. And here we are. I'm 28 weeks pregnant.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Like I said, it's a little ridiculous to try to condense everything that you've experienced in such a short period of time, because it's hard to imagine the ways that you've gone through, the emotional ups and downs, and what you've gone through with your partner throughout this time, because it's not easy. And so, I mean, taking us back, so one of the things you can't help but do on a journey such as yours is to learn a ton about fertility, about how your body works, about what could be going on, what the factors are that really do make the most difference. Because I think initially there's often things that you think are going to make a big difference, and it turns out later on you find out that those were not actually the things that you need to focus on. So maybe you could share with us what some of those takeaways were for you. So some of the things that if you could go back 9 years ago and talk to yourself, what are the top things you'd want to know?
I think the first thing that I'd want to know is about like fully understanding my menstrual cycle. That was a thing that I did not really understand until I read Taking Charge of Your Fertility. And, you know, a really interesting thing too is at that same time I was in grad school and I was a coordinator for a teen pregnancy prevention program. And I had to learn all about the menstrual cycle so I could teach it to other girls and realize, like, I am in graduate school. I am in my mid-20s and I had no idea about any of this. And here I am, like, having to learn this so I can go teach it to middle school girls. So I realized that that's the norm for most women. And that would be the first thing that I would like to have known at the very beginning. Some other takeaways are, as far as nutrition goes, I know that nutrition is really hugely important just for our overall wellness. I mean, we cannot separate our overall wellness from the food that we eat. And I think knowing earlier on that nutrition is not a one size fits all sort of thing, that I can't just do such and such diet that somebody else is doing and expect to have the same result as them. Because I did that multiple times. I tried various diets that because somebody else had done it, and without specifically seeking out a nutritionist and saying, hey, let's talk about what's going on with my body and what I need. I was doing what other people had needed. So that was a big shift as well once I learned about that. And something that I didn't learn until I was about 7 years into the journey. And then I think also I would like to have known early on what some of the things that I learned sort of in the second half of my journey about myself, about my identity, about how I am a whole valuable person just as I am, whether or not I have children. And that I know is a big struggle for a lot of women. And that was a big struggle for me. I had this sort of sense that I was incomplete without kids. Which is really, really tough when all of your friends are having babies and this is their life and this is what you're surrounded with. And at the same time, it took me quite a while to get to a place where I realized that, you know, whether or not I have kids, I have to know that I have a purpose and I have value and I have worth, and that knowing that ultimately will make me a better mother too. Because if I am putting all of my value into having children, then I'm going to put all of that on them when they come. And that's really unfair to them and to our relationship. So I think those are the biggest takeaways for me.
That's really powerful, Stephanie. I think the third one is one of the hardest, because to get to that place, you have to go through basically years of growth, right?
Right.
You didn't just start there.
Right.
And so let's talk about what it's like to watch your friends conceive. I know that is a theme that comes up in my group programs quite a bit. And so currently I have separate groups going. So I have one group that's specifically women who are trying to conceive either right now or they're doing preconception preparation. But it comes up then when you've been trying to conceive, because I mean, if you're on Facebook, it's every day. My Facebook feed is full of babies. It's just the age that we're in. And if it's not babies, then it's grown kids or pregnancy shots. So how did you cope, I guess, initially? And then how did that shift as you went through as your journey continued through the years?
Sure. Initially I did not cope well. I remember pretty much just weeping every time I found out one of my friends was pregnant. And what it felt like was learning that they were pregnant somehow took away from my ability to get pregnant. It was like them saying, and because most of them were doing it without trying to, which is fantastic for them, but feels like a punch in the gut to a person who has been trying for so long. So in the beginning, it felt like somehow that meant that there was one less opportunity for me, which is not logical, but that's just where you go when you're in the depths of that desperation and despair. So there were some baby showers that I chose not to go to because it just felt like too much for me, or just going into the bathroom to cry for a little bit at a baby shower because it was so hard. And I think that it wasn't, like I said, it wasn't until like 7 years in that I started to really have this shift. I think everything started to shift around 7 years, that I started to have this shift of understanding, like, this is not about me. This is not against me. And seeing other people have children as an encouragement, that it's sort of the difference between a mindset of lack and a mindset of abundance. So having that mindset of lack, that if somebody else is blessed, then that means that that's less blessings for me. If I have the mindset of abundance, somebody else's blessing means, wow, look at the amazing things that happen in life. Look at all the possibilities. And then I can believe those things for myself as well. So I can't remember where I started with that whole statement, where I was going. But there was definitely that shift that happened, and the coping changed dramatically over those years. I don't think, I wasn't coping that well in the beginning, and it took quite a while to get to a place where I was really viewing all babies and all pregnancies as a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, those are some really powerful words. I really resonated with what you said about shifting your mindset to one of abundance and looking at those blessings and thinking about that, meaning that there's an abundance of blessings to come. It doesn't mean that there's less for you. I think that that's really powerful. Mm-hmm. But something else that you said is also really powerful, in that you chose not to go to some baby showers. And I think that it's important to recognize that talking about things like this, if a woman's in the midst of this herself, you don't need to feel bad about it if you're having a bad day and you see a Facebook picture of your best friend who's gotten pregnant, and it just makes you want to cry, and you do, and you don't want to go out that day. That's okay too. I think that it's really important to honor those feelings and not to create a conversation around, you're supposed to think of everything positively, and you're supposed to feel like this is not the point of what we're saying. So I feel like I took two very distinct things from what you said. And one of them is to really give yourself the permission to set the boundaries that you need to set. So I know one of the things that I talk about in the group sometimes when this topic comes up is, have you thought about deleting your Facebook app for a month? I mean, it might seem really hard, but if you literally do, I had to do that, but it's for different reasons, But to delete the Facebook app, then you're not scrolling through the newsfeed. Then you actually have to go to your browser and type in your Facebook stuff and look. So it creates this extra step where you can actually, and if you're part of lots of groups, you can download the groups app and completely not go into the feed but still participate perhaps in the groups that you want to participate. You know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
to limit your exposure so that, and to give yourself permission to do that, to give yourself permission. And then, I mean, the other question that comes up, so maybe you can speak to this, because I'm not sure what your experience has been around that. But I've also been on the flip side as a friend, where one of my good friends that I work with, she got pregnant for the 4th time when she wasn't trying. And I'm pretty sure she said that her husband and her had sex like once, and he might have even withdrew. So, so then when you're on the other end of it, for her, sometimes she would struggle with how to tell your friend who's been trying. And so what I see is both sides of it just being really kind of mucky and gross and hard and just not nice. So then on the one side, if you're trying, then you, I remember one of my friends mentioning that, you know, it's like you almost feel it coming when your friend invites you to lunch. It's like this ominous thing where it's like, they're trying, but that's because they're trying to find a way to tell you and be concerned with your feelings, but they don't really know how to do that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I experienced so much of that because I had this really close group of friends, and I say had just because I've moved since then. They're still my friends. It was just a little different when we were all together in the same state. So I had this really close group of friends, and I know that it was so challenging for them because they all cared deeply about my struggle. They had been through it with me. They'd been through the losses with me. And so I know that it was very hard for them to tell me, to know the right way. I have one friend who, the first time she got pregnant by accident, and she texted me to tell me. And I remember just being furious. Like I was so upset about the fact that she got pregnant by accident. And then I was really upset that she texted me because my thought was, well, that's nice for you. You don't have to deal with my emotions if you send me a text message, but I have to deal with my emotions. But after I got through that, I realized she just didn't know how to do it. She didn't know the right way to communicate it to me because there really is no way to communicate that without, like, you can't really protect the other person's feelings. The person who's been struggling with fertility, they're just going to have feelings around it. And there's nothing you can do to control that. And that's really hard because, like I said, these are people who loved me so much and cared so deeply about what I was going through that I know that it was such a challenge for them to figure out how they can make it okay. But there wasn't really a way to do that.
Well, and even from then the other side, other perspective, I've experienced this again, not personally, but through friends and in my personal life, where someone's absence will be noted from a baby shower, right? And so it's like there's two ways you can react, quite literally. You can either be super offended and, you know, how can she not be happy for me and all of that drama, or you could recognize that your friend loves you and they're just going through a hard time. And so it's not about you if they're not able to be there. And maybe it's better for everybody involved. If you know what I'm saying, like if you take that time for yourself, it's such a hard situation. And so I'm glad we're hashing it out because I find myself in situations like that. And I often find myself just feeling what I consider just to be empathetic. So if someone just isn't there and you know that they've been trying to conceive for a while and you know, it's not like you don't know that this might be a hard day for them, you give them a pass.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't give them, you know, SHIT for not being there. You just give them a pass. You're just like, okay, so.
And isn't it just better that we do that in life anyway? Like that we just assume that other people are doing their best and that it's not personal. You know, if somebody can't make it to something or they even choose not to be at something, that it's not personal, that it's their thing. If we kind of live our lives that way, then we avoid being offended all the time.
Well, and then is it possible to is it possible to do that on the other side when your friend is pregnant and they don't tell you for a long time, and then it's your really close friend and they're like 5 months pregnant or something, and 4 months, and then they didn't tell you until then, like, is it possible to give them a pass because maybe they just don't know how to talk to you about it? And it's really just super complicated. And
oh, it sure is.
It makes me think of an episode of Sex and the City. I feel like there's always a reference for that.
Of course.
But the reference where, and I'm not even remembering it correctly, but Miranda got pregnant and she didn't even, like, she wasn't trying. Steve had testicular cancer, and so it was like, you only have one ball. And, meanwhile, Charlotte, so it was kind of...
Oh, that's right. Now I'm remembering what you're talking about, because Charlotte had been trying for so long.
Yeah, and then so she's sitting at the table, and Miranda's having conversation about potentially terminating the pregnancy, and she just had to leave.
She's
just like, I can't even believe that you're saying this right now. How could you say this to me? And it's not about you, but it's so... Yeah. So I suppose we can leave that and move to a different topic, but I'm really glad that we hashed that out a little bit.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and one of the questions that I have for you then is, how did this impact your relationship? So that's like a loaded question, because I'm sure there were times when things were good and times when things were challenging, but I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you and your partner managed through that time.
Oh, that's such a great question. And there's no way for it not to impact, I think, just all of your closest relationships. For me, it impacted my friendships in the ways that we've talked about already, that I know there was some sort of tiptoeing around me at times. And then in other ways, it really brought me closer to several of my friends, because they had been such amazing support through the loss of our pregnancy and through the loss of our adoption. And the pursuit of our adoption. I mean, all of it, they'd just been so fantastic and supportive and kind. And so that really brought some really deep, intimate relationships through that. For my husband and I, it had been sort of a roller coaster. We had really great times and really hard times. And I think one of the biggest struggles that we don't talk about a lot, and I won't get into too much detail because I know that it would make him uncomfortable, but something that we don't, as like a culture, talk about a lot when it comes to fertility is the how much it affects your intimacy, when this is something that is sort of supposed to be the natural result of the act of love with the person that you've chosen to spend your life with. You've chosen to create life with this person. And it's supposed to be just this natural consequence of that loving act. And when it doesn't happen, it changes the dynamic of that whole experience, when you're trying to time things and there's so much pressure placed on sex and when it's happening, and like how long you choose to lay there and let things settle. And like, I mean, just all of it it can really strip the intimacy from that part of the relationship. And so, that's an area where we had to step back a bit at times and say, okay, we're going to not try for a while so that we can get back to focusing on our marriage and focusing on that intimacy, and let it not be about having a baby, because we had to decide that our marriage was more important than having a baby. And when we were able to set that as a priority, then it made things really clear, and actually made things, not easy, but it made things simple. It made it simple to be able to say, okay, now things are suffering and we really need to take a step back and be okay with that. And I think another area where it affected relationships is with my parents, because I'm their only child. And so they have had to watch all of their friends become grandparents, and they were not having the opportunity to become grandparents. So they went through a lot of similar emotions to my husband and I of, the disappointment and the loss and the discouragement because they weren't getting that opportunity. And that, I think, at times put not on purpose, but I felt a lot of pressure. Like if I wasn't choosing, because we never went the route of any medical intervention. And so by not choosing that when I could have, and honestly could have potentially been pregnant sooner if we had done that, I don't know. But by not doing that, there were times where I felt like not choosing that was choosing to make them delay in becoming grandparents. And that didn't feel good either. So it affects every single close relationship. Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because that's not something that has ever come up on the show. And it's something that I haven't not really considered, although a few of my clients have mentioned that pressure of really wanting to go the least invasive route possible for them, their own selves, where it just does not feel right for them. So this is not a judgment. This is just saying that for some women, they've just identified that it does not feel right for them to just immediately go to assisted reproductive technologies. So whether that's IUI or whatever it is, just even that which would seem as though it's the least invasive, where I have a lot to say about Clomid. That's for another podcast. So it would seem as though it's the least invasive option. And even that not being suitable, let alone IVF, and feeling that pressure of denying your family what could be. So that's really powerful. And I think a lot of listeners are really going to sit with that for a bit. I didn't really think about it from the grandparents' perspective and for them having to watch all of their friends go through this. I guess it's always keeping up with the Joneses. Like we never get over this. Even as we get older, then it becomes something different. Then it becomes waiting for that next stage. So I don't know, maybe would you be able to talk a little bit about that and how that showed up in conversations with your parents, or just how you knew how deeply it was affecting them?
Yeah. Gosh, so this is something I haven't really talked that much about before. So I'm having to really think about it. I think about the ways it showed up in conversation. My parents have some friends who have 4 children, and each of those children has multiple children. And it always felt like one of those kids is always getting pregnant and like constantly they're always having more grandkids. And this is a family that I grew up with them. We're all very close. And so I remember my dad at one point making a comment about how come they get to have so many grandkids and we don't get to have any. And my mom my mom is one of 8 siblings. And so she has 5 sisters. Yeah, she's one of 6 girls. So she has 5 sisters. And so watching all of her sisters become grandparents, and I guess not all of them are grandparents at this point, but watching many of them become grandparents and get to be grandparents and experience that whole thing. There were times where she had mentioned that being hard for her. And I think I also, when I would hear some things like that, I think I would feel defensive and sort of take it personally because I felt that pressure. And it was not, I know now, it was not that they were intending to put any pressure on me, just expressing their struggle and expressing their sadness. And at the time, I just felt like this is so unfair for them to say these things to me when truly at this point, I know that it's better, I think, that they were open about those things and that I did get to have that perspective of knowing, I guess, that we weren't alone in what we were going through, that it wasn't just us having to deal with this, but that the people who love us most were also truly affected by it. And now that I am on my way to, becoming a parent, I already think about how much I love this little girl and how I want the best for her, and I want her to have a happy and fulfilling life. And so if I try and put myself in my parents' shoes and think about what that would be like to watch my daughter go through so much struggle, I think that I can start to understand even the slightest bit about what they've been through as well.
Yeah, very powerful in so many ways. And one of the ways, of course, is knowing that you're not going through this alone.
Mm-hmm.
But then with that in mind, you mentioned that pressure. And it's interesting because you're not the first person who I've spoken to who spoke about that struggle between deciding on how you want to proceed with regards to your fertility, what you want to do. So what you are and are not willing to do to make this happen. So how did you manage then to stick to what you desired, which was to avoid reproductive technologies, at least for the time being? How did you reconcile that with the pressure, not necessarily them telling you need to do it, but just that knowing that there was that pressure there, and knowing that by you going a different route, like you said, you delayed, potentially could have delayed it, where you could potentially have gotten pregnant sooner?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of being really headstrong and and lacking the financial means as well, knowing that a lot of that stuff was really expensive, and not having a whole lot of extra cash, but at the same time not wanting to like when I would think about like raising money for IVF, for example, it would just hurt my heart. I would think, gosh, there's so much else I could do with that money. And that is not a judgment on anybody who has had IVF. It's just how that felt for me. But at the same time, I would just have these thoughts for a moment, because definitely my husband and I both thought about it, but we would have these thoughts and then think like, what if we spent all that money and then it still didn't work? And I just believe at the same time, I think what it really was is that headstrong part, is that I just believe wholeheartedly that for most people, our bodies can do it. And if they have the right support, then, just a result of being well is good fertility. And I really, really hung on to that idea and that truth because I believe it so much. And so when we would consider doing some assisted reproductive treatments, then I just, for both of us, it was just kind of like, it never settled well. It never seemed like the right option for us. So I guess it made it fairly simple to make that choice because even though we would think about it, we would pretty easily go, yeah, that's just not, that doesn't make sense to us. That's just not right for us.
Well, you touch on something that's really important, and it's something that I found in the work that I do with clients to be a theme. And sometimes I'm still testing the waters to find ways to convey my belief in our body's ability to do it. So what you said is really powerful. I believed that my body could do this. And what I've experienced, what I've witnessed is that gradual chipping away at your self-confidence and your belief about your body's ability to do it. Really believing that you need this technology to do it. And there's no right or wrong way. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but one of the interesting things about becoming a mom is that you start to, a lot of your beliefs about parenting or how children behave in public or how you think you're going to react to situations, a lot of that just falls down around you. And you end up having more of a understanding and empathy for parents because you really have that understanding for why things go down the way they do, whereas before you thought it was different. And I feel like that applies in all different places. So by me talking about this, it doesn't mean that I'm trying to say there's a right way and a wrong way. But I do believe that it's important to question how we've gotten to the point where we believe that our bodies are not capable of doing it. And so one of the things that I strive to do in my work is to encourage my clients and, you know, the women listening to the podcast, not to think of your body as broken, but instead, when you learn to chart your cycles and you learn to read and interpret what is happening in your body, you can instead look at it objectively, kind of like as if you're a journalist, and you're looking at it and you're seeing essentially a printout of what is going on, whether that's hormonally, whether that's nutritionally, whether that's in terms of your endocrine function or your health. And it's quite literally a printout. So instead of thinking your body's broken, you could look at it instead like, well, this is my body's way of telling me what's happening. And it doesn't mean I'm broken. It means that I can work with people who are able to support me in getting my body back on track. And if you're ovulating regularly, then you know what I mean? Like and even if you're not, it's possible to get those things back on track. And it doesn't work for every single person, but neither does IVF.
Right. Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I found as well. So maybe you could speak to that, because I find that in my experience, women then, when they're not getting the results that they want within the time frame that they have in their heads, because we all have a time frame in our heads of when all the things are supposed to happen.
Right.
So if it's not adhering to the time frame, then we think, okay, I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to go do IUI and it's going to work. And there's a lot of interesting research about IUI, and the actual rate of live birth following it, like one round of IUI, it's not 100%.
Oh, super
low.
It's not
50%. It's not 30%. It's more like 20% or less.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remember when my husband first started to understand about IVF, he was like, he's so funny. He was just like, why don't we just do that? Like, if they can just like make a baby and put it in you, why don't we just do that? And I was like, well, because there's no guarantee at all that it'll work. And for so many people, it doesn't. And he was like, oh, okay. So I think there is sort of that expectation for a lot of people that, yeah, that would be the fix for this, whatever is broken in you. That's sort of the medical model anyway, right? That like there's something broken and the doctor has the magic thing to fix that, and it can't be fixed without that magic thing the doctor has. And what I've learned is really a lot of what you're saying is that the body is telling us what it needs through whatever the symptoms are that we're experiencing, and giving the body what it needs. Then, you know, even if you possibly could have children, as many people do with IVF or IVI, or even using Clomid, whatever your body needs, that need is still not being met unless you're also working to meet that need at the same time, which I know some people do. But if you're not, if you're simply doing whatever the doctors have recommended in this case, then your body's missing out on what it needs to be well and to function well. And whatever that issue is going to continue to be an issue, and your body's going to continue to tell you this is something that is not right and not working out for me. For me personally, it was a lot of digestive issues were coming up, and that's where I had to make lots of changes in my diet and nutrition, and then some symptoms surrounding my menstrual cycle that I actually still, even after all the charting and whatnot, didn't quite understand were not normal. Like, I didn't know that it wasn't normal or healthy to have a lot of lower back pain during your period. So there were a lot of changes around the nutrition that helped with that as well, and the acupuncture. And I just know that the pregnancy, I mean, me being pregnant right now is a result of my body finally, and my husband's body, I think too, finally having the support that it needed. And then I also, of course, have to say it's miraculous as well. I think all children are, and understanding the process and understanding how hard it is. I'm like, man, like every stinking baby is a miracle. I can't see it any differently now. But it's this combination of this incredible miracle and at the same time, my body finally getting something that it really needed to be well.
Well, and that's something that I aim and I hope comes through throughout the years that I've been doing the podcast, which is that your fertility is related to your health in so much deeper of a way than you would have ever have thought. And one of the things that I find most regularly and consistently in my client work is that we're all surprised by how quite directly and specifically our menstrual cycles are affected by what's going on in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a very, very common thing. I have never seen it where you see a menstrual disruption where, for instance, you typically ovulate a little earlier in your cycle, but you ovulate later and it's related to nothing. I've never seen that. There's always something very specific that happened very specifically at that exact place in your chart. And it's like that with other things as well. So if you see disruptions in cervical mucus production, if you see different patterns of menstruation or spotting, it's all related to the overall picture. And so it's very literally a printout. And so for what you're saying, I mean, over those years, I'm sure that it wasn't just one magical thing. Like you didn't just take vitamin D and all of a sudden
right.
you were pregnant. But what would you say, I think you've touched on it a little bit, but what would you say in your case made the biggest difference? And then the kind of follow up under that is, and how long did that transition take?
That is an excellent question, because I had been doing acupuncture for 2 years now, and it had been, I guess, almost a year and a half then when I finally got pregnant. And I was doing acupuncture weekly for several months. And that's what made the huge difference. One of the things that made the huge difference in my menstrual cycle. And I had all these symptoms like clotting and heavy bleeding and painful period and the lower back pain, all of those things that changed. And not suddenly, over those months, my period became much easier and more pleasant. And I didn't have the PMS leading up to it. Like all of these wonderful changes. Everybody thinks that their period is supposed to be horrible. And it stopped being horrible. And that was just awesome. So it was the result, I think, of the acupuncture and the nutritional changes. And again, they were nutritional changes that are not going to be a one size fits all. These were specific. There are some things that definitely benefit fertility more than others, for sure. But there were some specific sensitivities that I have that I learned about. So I had to remove dairy and gluten and eggs from my diet, in addition to adding in more greens and more, organic meat, being more cautious of having organic meats. And I needed to add more fat into my diet. So the combination of the nutrition and the acupuncture, and that over a year and a half, is how long it took me to get pregnant. And I think that like right at the very end, I had a consultation with Amy Raup, who I know has been on your show. She was on mine as well. And she is, for those of you who aren't familiar with her, she specializes with helping women get pregnant. Her whole program is Yes, You Can Get Pregnant. She's fantastic. So I had a consultation with her, and she had me add in to my diet things like collagen peptides and bone broth daily, which I think the two of those things helped tremendously with my gut health, because I was still having some issues with my digestion. And I think that was like the final thing to kick it into gear. And that's when I finally got pregnant. So like you said, it wasn't just one thing. It was a combination of things. Oh, and I was in the best shape of my life. I'd been doing CrossFit, which I know is controversial for a lot of people for fertility, but I've been doing CrossFit for a year and a half, and I was in the best shape of my life. And even if it wasn't even if I was working out too hard, like some people would say about CrossFit, I felt so good and so good about myself and so good about my body and what it was capable of. I can't imagine that had nothing to do with it. So all of those things, all of those things combined, I think are what finally made things happen.
Well, I'm so glad that you shared that, because the thing with like you kind of have two different options when it's like a crossroads when you are having fertility challenges in a way. So what do I do? Do I continue on the natural route and try to support my body to do this? Or do I bypass my body's systems and get the medical shortcut? And the thing with the medical shortcut is that it can force your body to get pregnant. But if you're not ready, so the other aspect of it is you can get so focused on trying to conceive that it's just like that's the goal. Conceiving, getting the positive pregnancy test.
Right.
But as a mom, when you're not healthy, then that's going to have an impact on your pregnancy and how hard that's going to be on your body, because I don't know that there's anything else more intense about growing a tiny human in your body.
Right.
And it sounds tongue in cheek, but I'm being literal, because the amount of energy that it takes your body, how tired, we were talking about that initially, how tired you are. Well, how tired I was, I can't speak for everyone else in the first trimester. It's because the baby's brain is growing and their heart and their spinal column and all of that stuff. And it is a miracle. And I have no idea how it happens. You can read a textbook about it and, you can learn all about that, but you could fill volumes of textbooks just to figure out how the brain grows. It really is a miracle. And so as I kind of step off my soapbox, it's just really, I think if it's so important to always remember that as healthy as you can be, the better it's going to be for you. Because then after the baby comes, when you find yourself in the postpartum period, then not only do you have to recover from growing a baby and from birth and all of those things, but now you have a baby who requires your attention 24 hours a day. So if you're not healthy going into this is a marathon you're entering, ladies. It has no finish line. Parenting has no finish line. And so you're going to be running for the next 50 years after this kid. So this is coming from a mom. That's my perspective. And so we have to look at it more than just, you just have to look at the whole picture.
Yes, I'm so glad to hear you say that. We have to have that long-term perspective because, like you said, there's no finish line. If the finish line is getting pregnant or just giving birth to the baby, we're totally missing out on the point because the point is I'm going to have a child, and that is the bigger picture, which is a commitment for the rest of your life. And so exactly what you said, that we've got to have this long-term perspective on all this stuff, which means being well, and which means with the work that I'm doing, so much of it is about being emotionally well beyond the physical stuff, which is, it's all interconnected, but being emotionally well, being good with yourself and who you are, and being as happy with your life as possible, so that when that baby comes and is introduced into your life, then it's good. You have the reserves to pour into this child, and you're not looking to this child to fulfill you.
Yeah, because that's a whole other complicated discussion, but your children are your world, but they also need to eat every couple hours, and they have a lot of requirements. So it's not all just you sitting there staring at your beautiful baby. That's not motherhood. There's a lot of that, but that's really not what it is.
Yeah, there's also there's
other
poop
stuff
and vomit
and it's all wonderful. Stuff. It's all wonderful, but it's not. That's not what it is. So you're not just going to be sitting there staring into baby's eyes for the next 12 years. So as we wrap up, there's actually one other thing that I wanted to just get your 2 cents on. You briefly, subtly mentioned that in addition to you getting healthier and all the changes that happen in your body, it was also the same for your husband. And The reason that I want to draw that attention is because another trend that I continue to notice in my client work, and I'm sure that you can relate because we're women, so this is what we do. We think it's all our fault. So we actually think that it's 100% us, and we do cartwheels and handsprings and everything under the sun. So you're connecting with your spirit animal, you're outside, you're doing every possible thing. And I've actually found there are times when it's just not even if it's brought up, like, oh, maybe we should, look at your partner and see if there's anything going on there. Well, it couldn't be him. So what are your thoughts about that from your experience in terms of recognizing the role that your partner plays in all of this?
I think that it's a complicated one. I think it's critically important, and I think it's also more difficult for men to get on board with that part of it. And there are lots of reasons. I think it's different for different men, but it is certainly not all on the woman. And that's something that I'm noticing a shift in how we're looking at that. And I'm very thankful for that. It's something that I think also we need to pay much more attention to than we are at this point. For me, my husband didn't make any huge changes, but there were some changes that he did make, like as far as his blood pressure, which is something that probably a lot of people don't think too much about when they're considering fertility. But I imagine that was an issue. So getting that under control for him, I think, was one of the big deals for us. But yeah, it's tough because I see women sort of trying to convince their husbands of it. And just like anything else in life, like, you can't make other people do things. And like in marriage, especially, you want to make your husband do stuff. And that's not a good idea to try and make them do stuff because you just can't. So it's tricky. And it's part of that marriage dynamic where we've got to weigh between like making the marriage a priority and making the fertility a priority, and how we navigate through that. And it's going to be different for every couple, but it's certainly something that we really need to pay some more attention to, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, I see what it is. As women, we're willing to take on all the burden. And even though you in name only type of thing, I know it could be him, but you never actually really legitimately, honestly think that it's his sperm. Like, you just never do. So right. Even though we talk about it and we all nod our heads, like, you don't actually look at your partner and think it's his sperm. So go home, look at your partner and think to yourself, it could be his sperm. That's your homework. Because yes. Honestly, like, we need to, because then what if it's kind of like what you said about IVF. Like, what if you pay all that money and you do it and it doesn't work? Like, what if you do all the back handsprings and your cycle is pristine and you've never been in such health, nutritionally speaking, hormonally speaking, and everything, and it's still not working, and you have to look at the blind spot. Right. Yeah. So as we wrap up, I wanted to ask you, you went through this incredible journey. You have enough material there to write a novel,
probably, yeah.
So, or a fiction, whichever you prefer.
Right. True.
And, but that led you to start your podcast, and it led you to create your coaching program. So why don't you talk a little bit about that before we wrap up for today?
Absolutely. So the podcast I started last April, and that was well before I became pregnant. And it was really a result of me going through all of this stuff for so long and realizing that it was tough to come across the information that I had been looking for. It was tough also to find the support of people who were also going through fertility challenges, but who were pursuing holistic methods. So many people go straight to the doctor once they realize that things are harder than they expected. And so it was, in a sense, a way for me to support what I needed. And And I didn't necessarily realize that at the beginning, but I started to realize it after I had created this show. And so I wanted, though, to share these resources that I'd found with other people, and to continue to find more resources to support the efforts of other women who were pursuing holistic methods of fertility. So that's when I started the podcast, and it's been so cool. It's been so much fun, and I have learned a ton and been able to meet some really amazing people. I get great feedback about it from the listeners, which just makes my heart so happy. And at the same time, as I was working on the podcast, this might sound silly, but I started to realize, like, oh, I have stuff to offer too. I thought that I'm just going to be interviewing experts and sharing their wisdom with other people, and then realized, like, okay, there's something to be said about the fact that I have gone through this journey, that I'm a marriage and family therapist. So I have some real good tips on relationships and emotions and how we can best support those things. And so I started to bring all of that into my podcast as well, bringing that up during interviews, and then also doing some episodes on my own about those things specifically. And then that all sort of led into, well, then I got pregnant. And then after becoming pregnant and then realizing that things are going to be okay, because at first I was a bit nervous, as I'm sure you can understand. But after getting pregnant and realizing, like, this is going to work out, we're going to have this baby, then I realized I was also at a place where I could really work one-on-one with other women who were facing similar challenges, and help them deal with those as well. So helping with the emotional challenges, helping them with the sort of the loss of identity that a lot of women experience during this time, the loss of their sense of who they are, and the loss of their sense of value. I want to help women to reclaim that and really know that they are amazing right now, and start to love their lives, and recognize also the emotional hangups that I think tend to play a role in these fertility challenges. Things like, why, asking questions like, why do you want to be a mother? I'm not sure most women ask themselves that. Like, why do you want to have a baby? And how is this affecting your relationship or with your partner? So what can we do now to support those things and to support you as just a beautiful whole human? And so I started this coaching program just a few weeks ago. Well, by the time this will be released, it'll have been a couple months. But I started this coaching program very recently, and it's super exciting. And I love getting to work now with women one-on-one and get to know their stories and get to know their personalities and help them specifically deal with what's going on with them. So that's what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very exciting. Congratulations on your new program.
Thank you.
So to bring our interview to a close, what is the one thing that you really want our listeners to take from our conversation today?
This is the one thing that I want every woman to know, and men should know this too, but I focus on women because that's what I do. And so I want every woman to know that she is a beautiful, whole, valuable person as she is, that she is not broken, that she is not lacking, that with or without children, I want every woman to know that you are incredibly valuable. That's my message.
Wonderful words to end on. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for being here today. It was so much fun to be able to chat with you and to really delve into your story. I know that so many of the listeners are going to be inspired by your story, and so many of the listeners just really needed to hear that today. So thank you so much, Stephanie.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
And where can our listeners go to find you? What is your website and all of the things?
Best place to go is holisticfertilitypodcast.com. And that's where you can find the podcast. And you can also find the link to my coaching program under the Work With Me tab. You can contact me directly there if you have questions about anything. And then the other place you can go is facebook.com/holistic fertility podcast. And that's where I do a lot of updates and add information about different articles I find. And that's also where you can find a link to the closed Facebook support group that I've got. And that is a totally free situation that is just for women who are facing fertility challenges to come in and support one another.
Okay. Well, thanks again, Stephanie. It was so much fun having you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode at fertilityfriday.com/139. I hope that you enjoyed my interview with Stephanie today. It was such a treat being able to talk with her, and I thanked her off air, but I want to thank you, Stephanie, again on air for being so open and so candid and so honest and vulnerable with your responses. I know I asked a lot of questions, and we really dug deep into your experience with fertility challenges, and I know it's not easy to hash that out. You're obviously in a super amazing place right now, so I definitely got the sense that it wasn't too tough for you to talk about these things today, which is why I was able to kind of go in and ask a bunch of different kind of deeper questions. But I just wanted to thank you for that, because I feel after our conversation, I just feel so compelled and excited and inspired to share your experience with the listeners, because I know that so many of our listeners are going to be impacted deeply by our conversation. So thank you again. There's so many amazing takeaways from the interview that I did with Stephanie, from looking at the challenges in a different way, from thinking about how to respond when friends and family members are conceiving all around you and it's not happening for you in the time frame that you were hoping for, from how to relate to your partner, and how the sexuality aspect of your relationship can really be challenged because of the kind of sex on demand situation and timing and all of the other things that come with this journey, how that can impact your intimate relationship. And one of the things that was really profound for me was to think about how your own struggle with infertility could impact your extended family. So your parents-in-law, sisters, brothers, the whole family, because often, you don't really think about that. And you don't really think about how it doesn't just impact you, but it kind of impacts your whole microcosm. So I'm back here with my squeaky voice, but I just want to thank you again for listening to the show today, for supporting the show. I really appreciate all of your feedback, all of the comments that you've been sending, and also I really appreciate the great conversations that are happening in the Fertility Friday Facebook group. So if you're a new listener here, welcome. You can join us in the Fertility Friday Facebook community, and that's fertilityfriday.com/community to be redirected to the Facebook group. And we'll be talking about today's episode and also tons of different topics around fertility awareness, fertility challenges, and all different types of topics. So I'd love to have you in there. And thanks again to our sponsor, Cora Tampons. So make sure to check them out, fertilityfriday.com/Cora. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to hang out with me today, to listen to the show. And as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.